Howdy, Ags. I have to say, I missed the response, a crowd of Aggies that goes back. Hopefully, you still said howdy wherever you are watching this. It is an honor to come to you today and welcome you to the 2020 Brazos County A&M Club muster. No doubt you have noticed that muster looks a bit different this year. Instead of a room of Aggies, we are here in front of a video camera. We have done everything we can to bring you this muster with respect to the social distancing guidelines and the health and safety of everyone involved. While it is sad that we cannot gather together in person, know that we are still gathered together in spirit. I've said it before, muster is by far my favorite Aggie tradition. Every year we come together as a family, spanning every generation and every race, creed, and walk of life. We have Aggies join us all the way back to the 1950s and some from the 2010s like me. And we answer here for a similar variety, sons and daughters taken too soon, and some that lived a long and prosperous life. We come together today to answer here for everyone that has gone before us in life, to remember that their spirit shall always be with us, and the Aggie family will always support us. And when it is our time, the next generation of Aggies will be here to answer here for each of us. Before we begin the program, I want to thank a man that has worked in the background to make this possible. Bob Palmares, class of 1973, our muster chair and president-elect. With the help of Lisa Aldrich, Bob has made this event possible on the tightest schedule possible. If you see Bob or Lisa around, please thank them for what they do. Muster is usually one of our largest events of the year, with more than 800 in attendance and 160 names to call each year. We have grown considerably from the time when we mustered together with the campus muster in Reed Arena. This year, we expect our largest audience ever, and I thank each of you for tuning in and watching this unique muster program. The only piece missing is camaraderie and fellowship, which is why we are planning a barbecue later this summer to come together and muster in person. The barbecue will be an opportunity to reunite our Brazos County Aggie family as the first in-person event after the COVID-19 shelter orders are lifted. We hope to see you all there. Now, I know you are not here to watch me talk to you for a half hour, so we must get on with the program. We have a lot to cover this evening. Thank you for allowing me to serve as the 2020 president of the Brazos County A&M Club. On behalf of the officers and board, welcome to the 2020 virtual muster. Thanks, and gig 'em.
Our Father, as Aggies come together in all parts of the world, we pause to praise you for the many blessings you have bestowed upon us over the years. We are humbly grateful for our Aggie heritage and the comradeship we enjoy because of our love of our university. We pray that our sense of fellowship spreads to people across this great nation and world in order to bring all men and women into a new bond of friendship and mutual understanding. We pause to remember those who are absent. May we have a reverent appreciation for the great examples and sacrifices given by those of us whom we honor by silver taps this evening. We ask for strength to try to do our tasks better in service to humanity, our nation, our university, and our associates. Bless the inspiration of this occasion that we may be strong in body, keen in mind, friendly in society, and religious at heart. It is in your precious name that we pray. Amen.
It is my extreme pleasure and honor to introduce Dr. Bowen Loftin, President Emeritus, Texas A&M University and Class of 1971, as our speaker. His love of students was a motivation for the career and service path that he has chosen. Dr. Loftin holds a Bachelor of Science degree from Texas A&M University and a PhD in physics from Rice University. He has held key positions with several universities, including the Chancellorship at the University of Missouri and the Chief Executive Officer position at Texas A&M Galveston. He has made significant contributions in the science and technology fields and has authored or co-authored over 100 technical publications. Most importantly, in February 2010, he became the 24th president of Texas A&M University in College Station, Texas. He was and is one of the most popular presidents A&M has ever had. He and his team's efforts were key to Texas A&M joining the Southeast Conference in 2012, one of the most significant milestones in A&M athletic history. Dr. Loftin has worked with thousands of Aggies, from students to former students, faculty, administrators, as well as Aggie-related organizations across the country. We are proud that he and his wife, Dr. Karen Loftin, now make the Brazos Valley their home. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Loftin.
Howdy, Ags. It's good to be in front of you today. This is a most unusual muster. I've never done one like this, and I hope I never have to do one again like this. But because of our unique circumstances right now, we're doing this via video. So rather than talking to a group of Aggies right in front of me, I'm talking to a camera, and I'm imagining that same group of Aggies out in front of me in the audience here. So again, howdy, and welcome to the 2020 muster for the Brazos County Texas A&M University Club. Muster to me is a combination of many things. It's a solemn moment to remember those Aggies we've lost in the last year. It's also a moment of joy. We get together in fellowship, remember good times together, wonderful times on campus and off campus. And it's, again, a reaffirmation of a tradition we hold dear, one that serves as an essential glue for Aggies worldwide. Social distancing and shelter in place are new terms for us to use now. And again, I'm sad I can't reach out and literally touch the Aggies who will be part of this muster. It's interesting to me that COVID-19 has brought us to a new time, a time which has solidified its role as a major factor in our lives. This past week, in fact, it became the second largest cause of death in the US after heart disease by a tiny amount and ahead of number 2, which is typically cancer. Next week, it may well be the largest cause of death in our country. And it hopefully will be gone very soon and will no longer be having this issue. But right now, here we are. I want to take a moment to recognize one of the approximately 145 names you'll hear called in this muster. This gentleman is Clayton Williams, class of 2003. Mr. Williams passed away at the age of 38. I bring his name to your attention because as an Aggie who left us November 25th of last year, he is connected to us in a way that's very special. This is the grandson of Major General James Earl Rudder, my president, a name we all know and a name we all revere. Clayton died much earlier than most in our midst die. And I want to thank my dear friend Bud Rudder, class of 1962, for bringing this to my attention and making sure I could mention his death in this particular speech. Our deepest condolences go to Linda and Jim Williams, Clayton's parents. I want you to think for a moment about your favorite traditions. I have been asked literally thousands of times what my favorite tradition is. And my answer is, I have many favorite traditions, plural. And that's, I think, true of all of us. But if I had to list traditions in some kind of order and put at the top of the list those that I hold most dear, it would have to be muster and silver taps. These two traditions, perhaps more than any other in our list, bind us together in strong and unique ways. Most universities of any consequence and age have created traditions over time. Our traditions, I think, are perhaps the most in terms of the ability to truly bond us together as a family, more so than any place I've ever been. I've been part of 7 different universities in my lifetime as a faculty member administrator, and I've never seen anything to approach our use of traditions and the way in which they make us a unique, bonded, true family. I'm going to talk tonight about death. Death is not a subject we tend to want to focus on very often, but it's central to both muster and sober taps. It's at this time we really contemplate death. As some of you may know, I grew up not very far from where I am right now, in a town called Navasota, small town. And one thing that small towns have done in the past is use funerals, a recognition of death, as a way to bond together. I recall from my earliest years in Navasota going frequently, perhaps even almost weekly, to funerals involving family and friends. These, of course, serve to celebrate the life of an individual, but they also had a very strong role to play in bonds. They allowed people to return home who had left earlier, to renew friendships, to renew fellowship with close relatives. And we had that. We had that celebratory aspect of it for the deceased. We also had a joy in terms of our ability to come together again. And that sort of thing I brought with me when I came here in 1967 as a fish. I brought that with me. And that meant that muster and sober taps were really familiar to me in a sense, at least the way we use those traditions at Texas A&M. So let's get to it. I want to talk to you tonight about a number. My number is 73. And I'll come back and explain what that means in just a moment here. The number 73 may mean nothing to you. It's not a class year in this particular case. It's the number of students at Texas A&M who passed away between June 15th of 2009 and January 13th of 2014, the time I served as president of Texas A&M. I lost 73 of my young Aggies during that time as president, and nothing else about the job I had to do at Texas A&M as president weighed more heavily on me than dealing with that very fact of losing 73 18, 19, 20-year-olds during that time period. Now, that number may seem high to some people. Given our size as a university, given the demographics, it's not a big number. It's a pretty expected number for a size campus that we have. Yet every one of those young Aggies who perished during my time as president meant something to me and meant something to our institution and meant something to many others as well. I want to reflect a bit on how we handle this. First of all, in sober taps. As you probably know, monthly during the academic year on campus, when a student or students die the preceding month, we have sober taps. That particular event brought me together with the family and close friends of each young Aggie who died. At that time, the MSC was being rebuilt, and we tended to meet prior to muster as a small group over in the Core Center. And there you'd have the individual families who had lost a son or a daughter during the preceding month. You'd have members of our Traditions Council, an extraordinary group of our students here who are the ones who put muster together, who put silver taps together, who deal with this in very effective ways. It was very striking to see how this worked. Typically, you'd have 10 to 20 individuals from a family and very close friends from out of town coming together for each student who had died. I would always speak to them early in that process, then watch as the council members came up to them and talked about what was going to happen, gave them mementos of the event, and we then walked together over to Sully's statue, right in front of the dome of the Acme building, and there experienced that extraordinary moment of silver taps. And for those who are the family members and close friends who weren't Aggies, who had not been there before, they were startled to see 10,000 or more students standing quietly for half an hour in the middle of the night on our campus in honor of their lost one. That made you feel so special to be part of this great family of we call Aggies, that really have this ability to celebrate the life of one of the ones we've lost and to give reassurance. And the secret's very simple. The secret is basically that grief is never lessened by the event of silver taps or by the event we're doing today of muster, but it's made more bearable because now you know, as one who's lost a student, lost a close relative, now you know it's not your grief alone, but your grief is shared by hundreds, thousands, and tens of thousands of Aggies worldwide. That's what makes this special. Let me take a moment just to recount a couple of instances that I think you'll find profoundly moving as I have. I'll never forget one night walking to the Core Center and seeing the single mother of the student who had died the previous month, her only son. So think about this, a single mother, her only son gone. And she came by herself. I had never seen that before. I had never seen a person come by themselves. They always had family with them, friends with them. And again, 10, 20, easy, would typically come along for each individual being recognized. But here she was by herself. I went up to her and talked to her, of course, gave her my condolences, my thoughts about her loss. I then stood back and watched members of our Traditions Council go up to her, and watching her face, it was so clear that again, her grief was not lessened, but now she wasn't by herself. Her grief was shared by many others. She met students who knew her son here. They talked about their time together. That meant so much to her. It gave her a sense of peace and comfort. Nothing else could probably have given her that particular night. That was the magic I saw. Another time, it was hard for me because this young man, actually a graduate student, a little older than the average student we had lost, had passed away. It was hard for me because I had taught him in Sunday school during his middle school years. That was a tough one for me. Another I'll mention to you briefly was very tragic. This was a senior in the Corps Cadets, a young man who was full of life and humor. I knew him well. We had seen each other many times on campus. The last time I saw him before his death was at Midnight Yell, the Midnight Yell closest to Halloween. And you may know about that. Oftentimes our students wear costumes, and this young man was in costume. He was dressed like me. And we had a great laugh about it, took a selfie, and I really enjoyed that little conversation with him that evening. 2 months later, he passed away in a tragic, difficult car accident. Again, Silver Taps brought him back to us. The muster that year in his hometown was also one attended by many of his friends. And it was a way again to help his family, his grieving family, deal with this tragedy, deal with the loss of this 21-year-old Aggie. Well, that's who we are. That's what this does for us. And I find this tradition of muster to be one that, again, embodies who we are as Aggies, a tight-knit family with shared values and shared traditions, and a family that comforts each other. So the act of coming together tonight, even virtually, like the act of coming together during Silver Taps, reminds us that we're not alone. We're not just one person or a small family grieving the loss of a loved one. We are a huge worldwide family. Sharing the grief doesn't make it any less for any one of us, but it makes somehow the burden of bearing that grief a lot easier for all of us. So that's what it's all about. I want to close this muster speech today with you by reading something to you that I read at every single graduation I did during my time at Texas A&M as president. You probably don't know this, but I changed some things about graduation when I became president. For example, we never played the war hymn until I became president. We played some of that typical pomp and circumstance music you hear at every graduation. So I told the registrar when I became president, let's do something different. We end the ceremony rather than walking out to the sounds of pomp and circumstance. Let's walk out to the sound of our war hymn. And it was a great joy. My last graduation was December of 2013 as president, and I'll never forget sewing them off with the graduates that night with tears streaming down my cheeks. It was a hard thing to walk away from. But at every graduation, towards the end of the graduation ceremony, I read the following words to the graduates, directly to them. I said, fellow Aggies, you have today received a diploma certifying that you have met the very high standards of a truly unique American institution, Texas A&M. But you leave here today with something more. Aggies are known not simply for the knowledge and skills they acquire by taking courses at our great university, but also for more intangible but equally important characteristics: good judgment, leadership, and a service mentality. These characteristics are part of what we call the Aggie spirit. Therefore, I am also proud to certify today that you carry this Aggie spirit with you as you walk out of this hall. Use it to guide your decisions in life. Use it to embrace the communities in which you will live, and join your fellow Aggies in passing it along to the next generation. Congratulations and best wishes for your future. And that was the way I ended every ceremony during my time as president. And now I say to you, in the conclusion of this particular ceremony, thanks and giggle.
The last Corps trip. It was Judgment Day in Aggie land, and a tenseness filled the air. All knew there was a trip at hand, but not a soul knew where. Assembled on the drill field was the world-renowned 12th man, the entire Fighting Aggie team, and the famous Aggie band. Out in front with Royal Guard, the reviewing party stood. St. Peter and his angel staff were choosing bad from good. First he surveyed the Aggie team, and in terms of an angel swore, "By Jove, I do believe I've seen this gallant group before. I've seen them play since way back when, and they've always had the grit. I've seen them lose and I've seen them win, but I've never seen them quit. No need for us to tarry here deciding upon their fates. 'Tis plain as a halo on my head that they've opened heaven's gates." And when the 12th man heard this, they let out a mighty yell that echoed clear to heaven and shook the gates of hell. And what group is this upon the side? St. Peter asked his aide, that swelled as if to burst with pride when we our judgments made. Why, sir, that's the cadet corps that's known both far and wide for backing up their fighting team, whether won or lost or tied. Well then, said St. Peter, it's very plain to me that within the realms of heaven, they should spend eternity. And how the Texas Aggie band at once commenced to play, for their fates too we must decide upon this crucial day. And the drum major, so hearing, slowly raised his hand and said, boys, let's play the spirit for the last time in Aggie land. And the band poured forth the anthem in notes both bright and clear, and 10,000 Aggie voices sang the song they hold so dear. And when the band had finished, St. Peter wiped his eyes and said, it's not so hard to see, they're meant for paradise. And the colonel of the cadet corps said, as he stiffly took his stand, it's just another corps trip, boys. We'll march in behind the band.
Excerpts from the roll call for the absent by Dr. John Ashton, class of 1906. Corregidor, forevermore a hallowed name to countless sons of Texans yet unborn. Symbolic like, it stands for deathless fame, a shrine sublime till resurrection morn. Softly call the muster, let comrade answer, here. Their spirits hover round us as if to bring us cheer. Mark them present in our hearts, we'll meet some other day. There is no death but life etern for heroes such as they.
Major Harvey Harold Storms, class of 39.
Here.
Mr. Edgar Ilshner, class of 42.
Here.
Mr. Vincent Hughes, class of 43.
Here.
Mr. Wilfred Riedel, class of 44.
Here.
Mr. Lester Fincher, class of 45.
Here.
Mr. Pete Scamardo, class of 47.
Here.
Dr. Nelson Duller, class of 48.
Here.
Mr. Jim Moore, class of 49.
Here.
Mr. James Simpson, class of 49.
Here.
Mr. Hiram C. Sloan, Jr., class of 49.
Here.
Mr. Jack Baker, class of 50.
Here.
Mr. Arthur Katanak, class of 50.
Here.
Colonel Henry Paul O'Neill, class of 50.
Here.
Mr. David Duncan, class of 51.
Here.
Mr. James Richard Robbins, class of 51.
Here.
Colonel Robert Siegert, class of 51.
Here.
Colonel Paul Lemming, class of 52.
Here.
Mr. Aurelius Madison, class of 52.
Here.
Mr. A. D. Rick Ricklick, class of 52.
Here.
Mr. Paul Saunders, class of 52.
Here. Mr. John Pearson, class of 53.
Here.
Dr. Newton Ellis, class of 54.
Here.
Mr. Floyd Grimland, class of 54.
Here.
Dr. Norbert Ohlendorf, class of 54.
Here.
Mr. Charles Ponder, class of 54.
Here.
Mr. Clayton W. Williams, Jr., class of 54.
Here.
Mr. Bartlett Holland, class of 55.
Here.
Dr. Murray Milford, class of 55. Here. Mr. William Scott, class of 55. Here. Mr. Richard Gentry, class of 56. Here. Mr. B. P. Pete Huddleston, class of 56. Here. Mr. Dave Wilkinson, class of 56. Here. Mr. Philip Haas, class of 57. Here. Mr. David Conderla, class of 57. Here. Dr. Roy Van Guy, class of 58. Here. Colonel Teddy R. Ted Lowe, class of 58. Here. Mr. George Susares, class of 58. Here. Dr. Jack Bryant, class of 59. Here. Mr. Olin Brown, class of 60. Here. Mr. Shelton R. Dorkson, class of 60. Here.
Mr. Duncan Covington, class of 61.
Here.
Mr. James T. Rector, class of 61.
Here.
Mr. Raymond Bridges, class of 62.
Here.
Lieutenant Colonel Edwin Higgins, class of 63.
Here.
Lieutenant Colonel Bobby J. Woolley, class of 63.
Here.
Major Jack Curry, class of 64.
Here.
Mr. Jerry W. Gunter, class of 64.
Here.
Mrs. Darlene Yvonne Campbell Morris, class of 64.
Here.
Mr. Carlton Wayne Patchell, class of 1964.
Here.
Mr. Norman Pohl, class of 64.
Here.
Mr. Alan Schlent, class of 64.
Here.
Dr. Leon Russell, class of 65.
Here.
Lieutenant Colonel David Fuller, class of 66.
Here.
Mr. Robert L. Ross, class of 66.
Here.
Dr. C. Wayne Terrell, class of 66.
Here.
Mr. Richard Burleson, class of 67.
Here.
Mr. Larry Marish, class of 67.
Here.
Mr. Ricardo Olivares, class of 68.
Here.
Mr. Frank Thatcher, class of 68.
Here. Mrs. Eudoxie Wooten, class of 68. Here. Dr. Stephen Holditch, class of 69. Here. Mrs. Sarah Hines, class of 70. Here. Mr. Anthony Jones, class of 70. Here. Dr. Jimmy Moore, class of 70. Here. Dr. Brian Morgan, class of 70. Here. Mr. Timothy Walters, class of 70. Here. Mr. J. Dooley, class of 71. Here. Mr. Philip Michael Waldrop, class of 71. Here. Mr. James Carpenter, class of 72. Here. Mr. David Dodier, class of 72. Here. Mr. Sedgwick Bryant Lloyd, class of 72. Here. Mr. David Wrights, class of 72. Here. Mr. James Watkins, class of 72. Here. Mr. Christopher Kling, class of 73. Here. Mr. Joe Calloway, class of 74. Here. Mr. Steve Johnson, class of 74. Here. Mr. William Panconian, class of 74. Here. Mr. Michael Rivers, class of 74.
Here.
Mr. James Rose, class of 75.
Here.
Mrs. Mabel Hudson, class of 76.
Here.
Mr. Ernest Kirkham, class of 76.
Here.
Mrs. Sharon McCandless Newton, class of 76.
Here.
Dr. Rupert Palmer, class of 76.
Here.
Mr. Ed Simonini, class of 76.
Here.
Mr. Ronnie Tagliabue, class of 76.
Here.
Mr. John Williams, class of 76.
Here.
Mrs. Judy Wynn, class of 76.
Here.
Mrs. Mary Kasperzik Alexander, class of 77.
Here.
Mr. Lewis Wayne Stone, class of 77.
Here.
Ms. Bonnie Weber, class of 77.
Here.
Dr. Stephen Pierce, class of 78.
Here.
Ms. Helen Sewell, class of 78.
Here.
Mr. Robert Schultz, class of 78.
Here.
Mr. Glenn Ross Ashley, class of 79.
Here.
Dr. Dudley Smith, class of 79.
Here.
Mr. Sergio Garibay, class of 80.
Here.
Mr. James Summerlin, class of 80.
Here.
Mr. Robert Adudel, class of 81.
Here.
Colonel Samuel Cyphers, Jr., class of 81.
Here. Colonel Glenn Starnes, class of 81. Here. Mrs. Laura Mooney, class of 82. Here. Mr. Michael W. Harville, class of 83.
Here.
Mr. Gerald Garcia, class of 86.
Here.
Mr. Paul Ramirez, class of 86.
Here.
Dr. George Shayanovich, class of 89.
Here.
Mr. Frederick Waddell, class of 90.
Here.
Mrs. Nancy K. Walden, class of 90.
Here.
Dr. Xuanzhu He, class of 93.
Here.
Mr. John Robertson, class of 93.
Here.
Mr. John Williams, class of 94.
Here.
Mr. James Kirk, class of 95.
Here.
Dr. Mohammed Omran, class of 95.
Here.
Ms. Catherine King, class of 96.
Here.
Dr. George Carter, Jr., class of 97.
Here.
Ms. Linda Bowe, class of 98.
Here.
Mr. Brooks White, class of 02.
Here.
Mr. Clayton W. Williams, class of 03.
Here.
Dr. Susan Vidak, class of 09.
Here.
Mrs. Catherine Brown, class of 10.
Here.
Mr. Stephen Dunning, class of 10.
Here.
Ms. Laura Coyne, class of 11.
Here.
Mrs. Paulina Rowland, class of 11.
Here.
Ms. Megan Dudley, class of 13.
Here.
Mr. Kevin Sawyer, class of 14.
Here.
Ms. Samantha Shoppy, class of 16.
Here.
Dr. Linda West, class of 17.
Here.
Mr. Andrew Brightwell, class of 19.
Here.
Mr. John Parrott, class of 19.
Here.
Mr. Aaron Raymond, class of 19.
Here. Ms. Megan Sanders, class of 19. Here. Ms. Carolyn Brown. Here. Ms. Carolyn Cantrell. Here. Dr. John J. Coldis III. Here. Dr. Creighton Miller. Here. Dr. William Hodges Mobley. Here. Ms. Mary Ruth Patronella. Here. This concludes our roll call for the absent.
In Memoriam by Lieutenant Colonel David Harrigan, class of 1968. We stood a little taller and a little prouder then when we heard the call of muster and the roll call just begin. We stood there all together and wiped away the tears when our names were called out softly and answered with a here. And so we've joined together with our brothers of the past to make our final resting place at Aggieland our last. We take a toast to our brotherhood wherever they may roam. For us, the trek is over. Aggieland, we're coming home.
Thank you for joining us this evening as we honor those who have gone before us. We have been privileged to assist with Aggie Muster 2020, the most cherished of our traditions. Thanks so much to wonderful volunteers, to the Brazos County A&M Club officers and board, to the Muster Committee, and others who have helped make this presentation such a memorable event. We appreciate each and every one of you for your tireless dedication. A special thanks to Dr. Bowen Loftin, Texas FilmWorks, and to the TexAgs Group. May God richly bless you. The 2020 Texas A&M Muster of Brazos County A&M Club is now complete. I charge each of you to remain firm in your loyalty to your country and to God, to keep warm in your hearts your affection for each other and for Texas A&M University. The muster is dismissed until April the 21st, 2021. May God be with us until we meet again.